All right, so today is August 25th, 2022. We are here in Calvary Church in Edina. I am Kevin Yee, the interviewer. Sakith Budadeti is here as a cameraman, and Ben Solsvig is also here. We're here with Mr. Lance Little, who is a veteran of Vietnam, and we're here to interview him about his time of the service and his life. So thank you very much for coming. Can you start by telling me where and when you were born?
Oh, I had to say, first of all, I said before that my full name is Rodman Lance Little, not to be confused with my father, Rodman Little, usually going by Lance, but formally it's Rodman. I was born May 5th, 1948 in St. Paul, Minnesota, raised in South St. Paul.
Who were your parents and what did they do?
My father, the aforementioned Rodman R. Little, was a school teacher in South St. Paul. And as I said, he was an infantryman in World War II with the 25th Infantry Division. He taught for over 30 years in South St. Paul. My mother was Betty Myers, originally from Elkhart, Indiana, and she was basically a housewife.
Yeah. So what did you do while growing up?
We had kind of an interesting childhood. My dad was a school teacher, and his parents ran a resort out in the Black Hills of South Dakota.
Yeah.
So the day that school got out, we'd all pile in the car and go to the Black Hills for 3 months, and we had to work taking out trail rides and going on back trips and that sort of thing. So it was pretty tough duty.
Yeah.
And spent about 25% of my life out in the Black Hills. Liked it out there real well.
So, did you always know that you wanted to join the military?
Yeah, we were discussing this a little earlier, that the time that I was born, I don't know if a lot of the adults, males, were recently returned from World War II.
Yeah.
So it was, the subject of conversation, and it seemed like, I don't know if most, but an awful lot of people had been in the service, and hearing the stories all the time growing up. It took me a long time to figure out that Guadalcanal wasn't really a canal; it was an island.
Yeah.
And, had an uncle who just missed Iwo Jima, things like that. So yeah, I kind of assumed that eventually, one way or the other, I'd go on the military.
Yeah. So were those stories what inspired you to join?
Yeah, I'd say so. And quite early, I became interested in military history.
Yeah.
I don't know where it started, but the first one I remember was the naval battle of Guadalcanal. That was fascinating. All the ships that were sunk there, and it was pretty exciting, kind of frightening stuff. And mostly the war in the Pacific, and then later I got more interested in Europe and World War II, and the French War in Indochina, the 30 Years' War.
Yeah.
It just kept on expanding.
So where were you before you joined the military? What were you doing?
I'd started at the University of Minnesota.
Yeah.
I had 2 quarters in there, and I wasn't real happy that I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and I just finished 12 years of high school and wanted to go out and do something rather than another 4 years sitting in the classroom. So
Yeah.
at the end of the second quarter, I enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Yeah. So at the time, how did your friends and family feel about you joining?
This is March of 1967. Everybody is kind of considering, well, am I going to get drafted? Do I want to get drafted?
Yeah.
Would I be better off enlisted ahead of time? And that was kind of the main subject. I didn't know. I wasn't really in yet. I don't want to go, so I'll go to Canada. But,
Yeah.
I don't know percentages. A lot of the people I graduated from high school with did go on the military.
Yeah. And At the time, was there a lot of controversy about the war yet?
Not really. It was starting pretty quick, but at that point, no. Quezon, Tet Offensive, all of that was a year ahead. And everybody was kind of aware that, things were cooking in Vietnam, but not a whole lot of detail on it. It was featured on the 6 o'clock news every night, but
Yeah.
it didn't really reach out and touch you.
Yeah. How much did you know about the war before you joined?
I guess compared to what I know now, not much. Your main source of information was going to be the nightly news, and I would say generally they did a pretty poor job of reporting it. The politics and the military activity were so embroiled with each other, it was hard to tell what was actually going on. And when I got up there and stuff, that where we were, it was very, very different than, say, around Saigon or someplace in the south there. So every place I think that you went was a different situation, and it varied a lot.
Yeah.
Mine was the real one, of course. Everybody else.
Do you remember why you chose the Marines over the Army or the Air Force?
I didn't want to go in the Army. A lot of the family historically was in the Army, probably starting out with the National Guard and then going from there. I liked the Navy, ships, that sort of thing, and
Yeah.
that kind of led to the Marine Corps.
So when did you go to training?
When?
Yeah.
March 27th, 1967.
And where was that?
Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego.
Yeah. So how long did that take?
I don't know, what was it, 8 or 9 weeks, it's hard to tell. Then right after that, you went to what they called Infantry Training Regiment at Pendleton, which is only 50, 60 miles up the road. And that was another 2 weeks. So I think it was probably about 12 weeks by the time everything was said and done, as far as boot camp and that sort of thing. Then right after that, I was back at San Diego for a year, electronics school, basic electronics and ground radio repair, radio fundamentals.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to sit in the classroom anymore, so what do? They put me in the classroom for a year.
What are your most iconic memories of boot camp and training? Probably a lot of them.
I'd never heard obscenities like that hollered out loud in public before. That was interesting. And the drill instructors, the whole persona, they just keep on hollering at you to the point that pretty soon everybody just gets tired of it and starts laughing. And
Yeah.
they try and torture you and make you do what they want, and everybody's going, nah, they're going to torture us anyway, so might as well have fun doing it. And it's boot camp in the Marine Corps. It's kind of a world famous experience.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe if you haven't been there.
Would you say that movies like Jarhead and other war movies are accurate in that regard?
What was the one? Full Metal Jacket. There was a number of in there where you go, oh yeah, the boot camp scenes, particularly, and the old one with Jack Webb, the DI. That was very good. That was almost like he had actually been there.
Yeah.
Just the mannerisms and that sort of thing. The Deer Hunter, that was just kind of weird. Apocalypse Now, that was really weird. That some of the things were kind of interesting, but it didn't seem like it was really all that much about Vietnam.
Yeah.
In other words, generally the movies, I think, weren't very good.
Yeah. Did any of your instructors stand out?
As in drill instructors?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you remember all of them very vividly. There was one, Johnson, he was smallish, 5'6", 5'7", and I suppose 125, 130 pounds, something like that. And we were having a little meeting one day, and he asked me a question, and I answered without, we were sitting cross-legged on the floor. I didn't jump up before I answered his question. And he just reached over with one hand, grabbed me by the throat, and jerked me into the air. And I suppose I was 165 pounds at that time. I was very surprised by his strength. That was interesting.
So when did you finish all of your training?
April 1968. Well, you keep on going to schools and all the time, but that was the end of the formal training.
Yeah. And what unit were you assigned to afterwards?
Com Company, Headquarters Battalion, 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune.
Yeah. And were you immediately assigned to active duty?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a little strange right then that they needed all the warm bodies they could get in Vietnam. And when I went to Lejeune, it was, visibly a little bit empty, that a lot of people had already shipped on. And they had one battalion that was on float in the Mediterranean all the time, another battalion in Gitmo in Cuba. They must have had another battalion on float in the Caribbean. So that's 5,000 or 10,000 guys who are gone.
Yeah.
And like I said, most of the stuff had already gone to Vietnam. But a lot of your older equipment and stuff was still back at Lejeune. That was right at the transition. Wired circuits and tube radios and stuff, and they were just transitioning them to solid state modularized electronics. So by the time you got to Vietnam, it was all the new stuff, and you never saw that old stuff again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what surprised you the most about military life?
Just after hearing all the stories through the years, I guess you kind of expected most of what you ran into. I can't say anything really surprised me very much.
What were your living conditions like? Where did you sleep and eat?
Generally, in boot camp and initially, they still had these old Quonset huts. I suppose those were 20 people to a hut in
yeah.
World War II era. And then after that, when you went out with the units, it was usually squad bays, 50 or 60 people in a big room, double the size of this room, with double stacked bunk beds, racks, and showers at one end, and a company office, that sort of thing. And usually there'd be a company on each floor, the bigger ones, and probably there was 4 companies to a building. And they were new. They were probably built in the mid-60s and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Vietnam, that was a little different.
Yeah. So when did you go over to Vietnam?
August of 1968.
How were you transported there?
Very quickly. I was TAD, temporary attached duty to a school at Lejeune, learning another piece of equipment. They called it TSC-15. They called me in on a Thursday afternoon and said, "You're going to Vietnam." I went right now. And so I checked back into the company. And then they leave me alone on Saturday and Sunday. And Monday morning, they put me on a C-130 at Cherry Point Air Station, flew us across the country to Camp Pendleton, and then we had 2 weeks of what they call staging battalion, running around out in the hills, setting up ambushes, getting ambushed, staying up the whole night, that kind of stuff. And then the Vietnam. So I suppose from the time they told me to the time I got there, well, I should be able to figure that out. It was about 3 weeks elapsed.
Mm-hmm. And what was your first impression of Vietnam when you got there?
It smelled really bad.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that hits you stepping off the plane. Heat, humidity, and it stinks. And somehow, even though you don't know, you know it's not true, watching TV and stuff, you got the impression rice paddies, and you know it's flat. And well, they talked about jungle and stuff. And we're flying in to Danang late in the afternoon. It was getting towards sunset. Man, here's these mountains all over. I mean, it looks like the Rocky Mountains or something. In point of fact, I think they were about 5,000 feet. But they're coming right up out of the ocean. And it's, you know, you just, nothing like you expected. And it was getting dark enough that all these lights are coming on. So here's all these mountains, yeah. and here's a little pool of light on the top of each one. And you're like, no, I hope those are our guys, because otherwise it'd be in big trouble. And, then by the time we landed, it was, I guess that's typical of tropical areas. It goes from dusk to just jet black, boom, all of a sudden. And that night they transferred us over to a transient barracks, so you really couldn't see anything that day.
So what were those first few days like? What'd you do?
In state of shock, you know. They're not big on giving you information. When we got to Pendleton, on the way out there, your orders would be stamped either 1st Marine Division, 3rd Marine Division, or FLC, which is Force Logistics Command. You know, it's all the support units and stuff. And at that time, generally speaking, you really didn't want to see 3rd Marine Division stamped on your orders, because that was up all the way up in I Corps as where the big battles were going, and historically they were the ones that were getting into it with the NVA forces all the time. From start to finish, that was just a hot area. So I saw 1st Marine Division. I oh, that's good. And then after that night in transit, the next morning, reported down to the air base, and no idea where I was going. And they called out 7th Engineers in Fort Erie. So I did, and we went to the battalion, which is only a few miles away. And up until that point, you didn't know if you were going to be carrying a rifle out in the mountains someplace, or, you know, you didn't know what you were going to do. And so when I heard 7th Engineers, I really didn't know what to think about it. And it turns out it was an excellent thing. That, I don't know how much Marine Corps organization you want to get into, but this was what they call a Force Engineer Battalion. That you have the bit about storming beaches and, you know, shooting things up, and the classical Marine sort of thing. And typically they think that they'd go in and they'd be there for days or weeks or months, and boom, and then gone. In the Vietnam situation, it kind of evolved into a garrison kind of a situation, where they were there and they were going to be there for a long time. It turns out it was about 5 years. And so then all of a sudden you have to start thinking about roads and water supply and electricity, all that stuff. So they brought in specific engineering battalions to do that sort of thing. 7th Engineers was the one that went with 1st Marine Division. And you don't think a whole lot about it beforehand, but then after you get that, you realize that when the engineers get there, the first thing they do is build themselves some comfortable hooches. So, you know, they got a dry place to stay, and then hook up some showers and get the refrigeration going up at the club for the cold beer and stuff, and build a mess hall. So relative to the rest of the world, we had it pretty nice.
Yeah.
Not the Air Force. The Air Force, that was kind of like going away to college or something. But for the Marine Corps, it was about as good as it gets.
Yeah. And so what was your specific job or assignment?
I was supposed to be an electrician, ground radio repair. In the case of 7th Engineers, that consisted mostly of Prick 25s. It's the backpack radio that you see when they're out there running around in the jungle. And road sweeps with mine detectors was a big thing. So maybe I remember at one time how many mine detectors there were, but they were breaking all the time. Usually it was because somebody drove a truck across them, or they dropped them out of the back. Just stupid mechanical stuff that was, it was a piece of cake if you had the pieces. With the radios, they'd bring them in and you'd open them up and pull the case off the radio and maybe dump a quart of water out. And it became pretty obvious that we had what they call a hot box, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet by 2 feet high, lined with foil and some big heat lamps in there. And just put them in there and first of all dry everything out real good. And quite often that would do it. And,
Yeah.
depending on how much other crud was mixed in there. But then because of circumstances and stuff, I spent a lot of time as the driver for our platoon. So I had what they call a 151 Jeep, and I was running the staff NCOs and the officers around the Danang area a lot, which was good because I got to see a lot more of the country than most people did. And I wasn't getting shot at that much, and I wasn't hiking.
Yeah. So how long were you in Danang?
13 months. Army does a year, so Marine Corps said, well, okay, we got to go you one better, so we're going to go 1 month extra,
Yeah.
13 months. And I think actually on the ground it was 12 months and 2 weeks or something. Like I can't figure out how it worked exactly, but the Marine Corps is weird. That a lot of things they screw it up pretty badly, but some things they're very, very, very good at. And I got on the airplane at El Toro Air Station outside of Los Angeles, and we went from there, refueled in Hawaii, Okinawa, into Vietnam, and then they called us back. It seemed like it was a couple of weeks early, and when I hit the ground again at El Toro, it was exactly 13 months from when I left there. It wasn't accidental. I mean, they had it set up there. I think that they were very paranoid about people staying there 13 months in one day and then getting killed the next day. And
Yeah.
that would upset a lot of people.
So do you still remember any of your comrades from your unit?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is that you'd be dumped in, everybody goes over there more or less individually. You'd be dumped in with a bunch of people, and generally, I don't know why, but about halfway through it seems like a lot of people would rotate. And then when you were done, you were gone, and most of them you'd never see them again. I ran into a number of them from time to time, back in the States or somewhere else. I took a job working in downtown Detroit, 31st floor of one of the skyscrapers there. And one day they came in and they said, hey, they're down there on the street giving out free cigarettes. Oh, check it out. So we went down, and here they had hired a bunch of girls, and they were handing out 3 packs of some kinds of cigarettes or something. And so I went and I got some cigarettes, and this guy who was kind of herding these girls around came running by and stopped, and I go, I know that guy. And I had to chase him for about 2 blocks, but he was a sergeant that I was with in Vietnam. I think he was, at that point, he was from Philadelphia, traveling all around the country. But it was interesting running into him again. Yeah. And then there was a couple of them that I did keep in contact for the next 30, 40 years, at least intermittently.
So what was an average day like for you when you were deployed in Vietnam?
It's very hot,
Hot,
very dirty. I suppose we got up at 5:30, 6 o'clock, I don't even really remember. And we were right next to the big mess hall, so we go over there and get breakfast and then go up, and our shop was maybe 100 yards away. And any electronics that came in that needed repair, we went to work on those. And also, I don't know, somehow I drew the short straw, and I was the supply man for our platoon. So any equipment that you needed, I was supposed to order it, except no one had ever told me how to be a supply man. So it was a little tricky, a little bump and jerk for a while. And the S4 for the battalion supply officer, was a major marshal, and he was almost a caricature of a Marine officer, you know, the crew cut, no neck and stuff, and not real humorous. And I'd screw things up pretty regularly because I didn't know how you were supposed to do it. And Major Marshal would call me over and rip me up one side and down the other, and I'd go slinking back and do it over again. But finally then, after 9, 10, 11 months, I don't know if he was rotating or I was rotating. He says, "Little, you did a good job." Huh? Thanks. It's the nicest thing he ever said to me.
So,
I suppose one thing I should say in there too is that we were headquarters company and service company for the battalion.
yeah,
Then the companies were out all over the Danang area from about 10 miles north, I don't know, it's 10, 15, Hai Van Pass. So really pretty serious mountains, and this Hai Van Pass was, you went over there to get further north in Vietnam, and it's really spectacular. It must have been about 4,000 feet up, I mean, right up from sea level. And you got up there, and it was 10, 15 degrees cooler, not nearly as humid and stuff. And
yeah.
so our Alpha company was up there, and then our Delta company was like 20, 25 miles south. And Bravo and Charlie in between. So a lot of running back and forth to the companies and stuff. And they were stationed out there with the infantry units, grunts as it were, and they'd be out building bridges and patching roads and all this other
yeah.
kind of stuff. And that was, as far as getting shot at, life was quite a bit more dangerous out with the companies than it was where we were.
Yeah. Did your unit ever experience combat, or were you mostly away from that?
When I got there particularly, I mentioned before, Force Logistics Command, that's all the supply for the Marines in Vietnam. It was behind the beach. I'm going to say it was like a square mile of storage, everything you can possibly imagine. And 2 great big transmitting towers in the middle with flashing red lights on them, and they called those Ho Chi Minh aiming stakes. So when I got there, they were getting rocketed on about a daily basis, but they were about half a mile away, so that was exciting, but it didn't bother us very much. And they always claimed that we didn't get it very much because we were tucked into an old quarry back up against the side of the mountain, and they had a hard time lofting them up and over and hitting us. Well, they proved that was wrong one night, and we took about 6 or 8 rockets, just boom, 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 boom. As a unit, as I said, the one time actually I did go out and play grunt, they said intelligence knew something was going to happen, but they didn't know what. And so within the battalion, they had what they called a reaction force. That was like a squad sized, a dozen people maybe. Anytime they